this is Vahid from VRF Education channel, and welcome to another tutorial series in my channel. Today I'm going to start a new tutorial on database programming in Python. Nowadays, data plays an important role in our life, and everywhere that you're looking, some data exists, and some people, mainly data scientists, are working on them and try to extract information, useful information. So in order to be a data scientist, you need to be able to work with data. Mainly you need to run queries, different type of queries, advanced queries over data. And also you need to be able to insert, update, or delete data from a source. So what is source? Data should be saved inside somewhere or something. That thing could be initially a file, a flat file, or Excel file, an HTML file, and the other ones. But it's somehow hard to work with files directly. So you need to be able to read data, push data forward and backward, and other stuff like that. So it's getting a little bit hard to deal with file directly. Databases came to the scene to help developers and get rid of some low-level operations. For example, when you want to look for some data inside a table, you don't need to read the file directly and see if all those values should be placed inside a structure and stuff like that. You just say, okay, give me some records or some rows that their specific column equal to something, or start with something, or greater than something. So you just need to apply your business through some specific commands, and you don't need to deal with files directly. There are a couple of famous database servers out there, such as Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and Postgres, and the other stuff. But among them, SQLite plays an important role for local applications, and it's ILO. It's take care of my eyes, so let's pause it for next hour. I always forgot it to pause it. So SQLite. SQLite is a local database. It's a database engine that uses SQL commands, and also if you are able to work with SQLite, you can work with other database servers such as SQL Server, and you need to learn a couple of other administration things. So SQLite mainly used for mobile applications and web applications nowadays, and also for data scientists. It also play an important role when you want to copy data or work with data inside something such as Excel files. It's better to work with SQLite databases. Today we're going to see how we can work with SQLite database in Python. There's a module designated for this purpose in Python version 3, and you don't need to install anything. And we're going to learn how to create a connection. When we want to work with the database, we need to connect to that database. And in Python for SQLite, we need to get a cursor object from our connection. So first we create a connection and then get a cursor from that connection. From now on, we should work with that connection, with that cursor, when we want to do something with our database. For example, inserting, updating, deletion, or selecting something from our tables. And then we're going to see how we can create tables inside a database. Because database itself is nothing. It's just a collection of tables, views, stored procedure functions, and the other ones. And also we see what's the best practice when we are working with SQLite in our codes. How we should protect our codes against some unexpected errors. Okay, let's go to VS Code and see how we can work with SQLite database. Okay, let's see how we can connect to a SQLite database in Python and do some database operations. The first step is to import SQLite 3 module, and it's part of Python 3 packages. And if you install Python 3, you don't need to install anything else. It's already installed on your computer, and you can make use of it. And it's recommended to write all of the database codes inside try except block, because sometimes you might face some challenges. You might misspell some queries or CRUD operations syntax. So you need to know what's happened and then do some appropriate response to that error. So I'm gonna create a try except block, and here, as with almost all DBMS servers, we need to connect to a database. So for this purpose, I'm going to create a connection variable, and it's equal to SQLite 3 dot connect. And here we need to define a file name or a database name. So as you know, SQLite database is it's a file on your storage. So I'm going to say it's mydb.db file, and you also can provide a timeout. So you specify a time of, for example, 20 seconds in order to let the driver to try to connect to a database. Okay, so I'm going to let it as default, and let's create except part, and here I'm going to say error is an instance of error class inside SQLite tree, and I'm going to call it error print error, and that's. And finally, after we do our jobs, even if it's success or not, we need to close the connection. So we should type something like this here: if connection, if connection, it means that the connection created. Okay, go ahead and call the close method over the connection, and then print connection closed. So that's it. Whenever we connect to a database, we need to close it. Okay, and after create a connection to a database file, to do all the other operations, we need to get a cursor from connection. So here I'm gonna create a cursor, and it should be initialized by calling cursor method of the connection. So it's gonna return a cursor instance to us, and we can do the next steps. For example, query over a table, insert something to a table, update values or delete values via that cursor object. So insert print database connected to DB. And after that, I'm gonna fetch the current version of SQLite driver. So how to do this? I'm gonna create a query, and it's gonna call a method SQLite underline version. That's it. I don't need to write it in capital case because I want to somehow separate it from the normal text. I write the keyword in SQL in capital case. Now I'm gonna run this query via that cursor object. So I'm gonna say cursor dot execute. You need to use the execute method to run some SQL commands, and the command is stored inside the query object. And after that, I'm going to say record. The result is accessible through cursor.fetchAll, and I'm going to talk about fetch all when we are going to check how to query over tables in SQLite database. But right now, it's going to fetch the result of this query and store it inside a named variable name result. And I'm going to say print SQLite version is result. That's it. So, and after that, we are getting into finally part or finally section, and because we already opened the connection, so we're going to close the connection. Let's see what we have inside the output. And before that, before running the application, when we call the connect method, it's looking for a file that name is something like this, the parameter that we passed. And if this file doesn't exist in the current directory, it's going to create an empty database, and then we can add table or other things into that database. And if it exists, it's going to just create a connection through that file. So let's run the application. Here it says connected to DB. SQLite version is 3.35.5, and the connection closed finally. So, and this is our file. It's gonna create it automatically. And let's also do something like this. I'm gonna call an invalid function here. Let's run the application. It says I'm connected to database, and the error happened. No such file, SQLite underline version 2. I don't have such function inside my module. So, and then after that, we get to final part and close the connection. Pay attention that we are connected to database and we need to close it. Although we have error here, but we connect to database, and we are not able to run this query, so we need to close it. Okay. There are some important points about this block of code when we are trying to connect to a SQLite database. First of all, the connect method is not thread safe. It means that SQLite 3 module doesn't allow sharing connections between threads. If you try to do so, you will get an exception at runtime. Okay. And after that, we can get as many as cursor objects we want from a connection. It's based on your decision to how to do things. And we already know that we should use this cursor object to run query or commands over our tables in a database. And also, cursors are not thread safe. It's the same as a connection itself. So we cannot share them among different threads. And again, we always try to put our all codes in a try block. So if any database exception happen, we can catch it and do some appropriate points and prevent our program from sudden crash. And we are going to use error class inside SQLite 3, and it's going to help us to understand what is the error about using some command text and also some error codes. Error text and error codes, I'm sorry. And then it's always a good practice to close the connection or close the cursor and the connection object once your work gets completed to avoid database issues. So always after doing some database operations, try to close your connection. These are the important points when you want to connect to a database. After connecting to a database, the next step is to working with data. And we already know that data is stored in tables. So we need to check for table existence in order to prevent some challenges that we might face in future if table does not exist. For this purpose, we are going to add some create table commands inside our application, and then we check if the table does not exist in our database. We are going to create that table. Something like now that we just have an empty database. Okay, let's see how we can do this. I don't need these line of codes anymore, and let's create a function. I'm going to call it create tables, and right now I have only one table. Let's see in future what we are going to do. Maybe we add some other tables to this database. And here we need to receive a cursor in order to run create commands via that cursor. So we already know that every command and all the queries should go to database via a cursor object. Here I'm gonna create a query for creating a table, and I assume that you already know how to create a table using commands. Something like this: a command create table. The table contains students information, so I'm going to call it students. And what's the information? First is an ID. It's an integer field, and it's also our table primary key. And after that, we have a name. It's text, and it should not null. We should provide values for that. And also we have an email address. Again, it's a text, and it's also not null, and it should be unique. Okay. And we have a register date, register underline date or birth date, something like this. It's date time. And let's add. So that's okay. That's okay for right now. So this is it. Now I'm going to say cursor dot execute this query. Okay, go ahead and run this query for me. And after that, we need to commit our connection. Okay, I think it's a good idea to pass the connection there. Okay, so let's accept the connection. Here I'm gonna say, please give me a cursor. Connection dot cursor. So we execute our query through or via our cursor, and after that, when you run some commands, not queries, you need to call the commit method from your connection. Okay, you need to persist your change into your database. and after that we close it here. Now let's see how we should do this. I'm gonna say create tables and pass the connection to that function, and here I'm gonna say print print table created. Let's run the application and see. Okay, table created and the connection closed. Now let's see what we have inside our mydb.db. You can install extension for SQLite into your VS Code. I think I installed the first one, so you can view your DB file, open it anyway using SQLite viewer. So here we have one table, the name is students, and we have a primary key for ID column, name and email and registered date. These are the fields that we mentioned in our create tables method. So let's run the application one more time. I'm going to run it. It says error. Table students already exist. So how should we handle this situation? There are a couple of ways to handle this error. First one is to use SQLite capabilities. If your SQLite version is greater than 3.3, I think you can use this syntax, create table if not exist. If not exists. So that's it. After adding this part to our create command, it's gonna say, okay, the table created successfully, but it doesn't do anything to our database because we already have students in our database. So let's run it. It says set table if not exists. Okay, let's run it. It says, okay, I connected to DB, table created. In fact, we don't create anything, but we already know that, we already ensure that a student's table is inside our database. Okay. The other way to do this is to query over SQL master class. Let's see how it's going to work for us. Another approach is to query over SQLite master class and look for this table, the students table, to see if there's entry for this specific table inside SQLite master or not. So I'm gonna remove this part. So if we run the application one more time, it says table of students already exist. And here, before executing this command, I'm gonna create another query. I'm gonna call it existence query, existence underline query. It's equal to something like this. I'm gonna select name from SQLite underline master table. The condition is where type equals to table and name equal to students. So that's it. Let's execute this query and fetch the result. So I'm going to say tables equal to cursor dot execute existence query, and after that I'm going to say let's just call fetch all here. So I'm going to fetch all the result from this cursor and convert it to a list. So if tables equal to a null or an empty list, I'm gonna say go ahead and create this table and commit it. Execute this create command and commit this one. So if I run the application, it says DB created. Let's move this part to this if. It's more appropriate to be here. Now I'm going to say run. Okay, because we already have a student inside this database, we are not going to run this part of the code. Let's also print the tables variable to see what's really inside it. So it says I have a students inside this list, and I'm gonna change it to students 2. So we don't have this table in our database, and I'm going to run it one more time. It says near to syntax, so it should be inside the quotation. So let's run the application. It says we have empty list, table created, and then connection closed. Now let's open the database. And here you can see we have two tables, a student and a student 2. So I'm gonna drop it very soon. We don't need to work with this one. So let's just remove it and use the first example. If not exists. It's more readable and better to work with. And I'm gonna comment these lines. So here I'm just gonna call cursor.execute and cursor.commit. So that's it. Here is the two way that we can check for table existence in our database, and then if the table does not exist, we're going to create it. And one last point, imagine that I stored a couple of scripts inside a file, .sql file, such as create tables, insert, update, and the other ones. So I want to read the file content and execute those scripts. How we can do this from Python application? So for this purpose, I'm gonna create a file. I'm gonna call it tables.sql. It contains create table command for two tables, software and hardware. So I'm gonna read this file and execute these commands. Now let's see how we can do this. Here, after executing the first command for creating a student's table, I'm gonna read tables.sql file into a variable and then execute the scripts inside that variable. So how we can do this? I'm gonna use with open. The file is located here, so I'm just gonna specify the name is tables.sql and the mode is R. I'm gonna read it as SQLite underline script. So I'm gonna say I have a SQLite, let's call it file, and then I'm gonna create a script or SQLite script equal to file.read. I'm gonna read all the content of that file. So I'm gonna say cursor.execute script, and then pass SQLite script to this method. So this gonna create this gonna run those scripts that result in creating two table, hardware and software, in my db.db file. So I'm gonna save it and run it. So it says table created, and let's get here and open it. So here, as you can see, we have hardware and software in our database. We have 4 tables. Now let's see what we can. Let's run one more time, see what happened. It's gonna say table hardware already exists, so the execution has stopped. If you're not check something here, you cannot expect to run all these scripts from the top to the bottom. So you need to be sure that all the scripts are incorrect and make your database in consistent mode. So these are the basic things that we need to do when we are working with a database in Python, SQLite database. I hope you enjoyed the content, and till next session, and see how we can insert real data into these tables from Python. Goodbye.